Tonight we wade into the fertile, life-giving marshes of the Nile Delta, sandals sinking into the thick, black mud as the dawn sun casts a golden glow over a seemingly endless forest of green. You are here, not as a pharaoh or a priest, but as a netter, a laborer of the river, on a mission to gather the raw material for one of history's most transformative inventions, papyrus. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth, blooming lotus flowers, and the faint, fishy breath of the river itself. Dragonflies dart like living jewels between the stems, and a hidden frog croaks a rhythmic, grumpy protest at your intrusion. Your target is the Papyrus papyrus, a plant that looks like it was designed by a particularly enthusiastic god, a tall, triangular stalk crowned with a shaggy, umbrella-like tuft of fine, radiating fibers, standing proudly a good 10 or 15 feet above the water's surface. You have to be careful, this isn't just a patch of reeds. This is a sacred plant, associated with the gods, and harvesting it requires a specific, time-honored knowledge. You're not just yanking weeds, you're performing a ritual that will, in a few weeks, result in a surface that can hold the words of laws, the prayers of priests, and the stories of kings. And let's be real, you're also trying to avoid the rather enthusiastic local wildlife, because a misplaced step could introduce you to a very grumpy hippo or a Nile crocodile that would find you a lot more interesting than the plants you're here for. Survival here isn't about brawn, it's about knowing the rhythm of the river and respecting its inhabitants. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first task is identification. Not every tall, grassy thing is papyrus. You run your fingers along the stem, it's distinctly triangular, not round, a key identifier. The central pith, you know, is what you're after, the soft, white, starchy core hidden beneath the tough green rind. You need mature plants, ones that have reached their full height but haven't yet become too woody or started to flower excessively. It's a judgment call, passed down from father to son, from experienced harvester to new apprentice. You're looking for the Goldilocks of papyrus stalks. As you wade deeper, the water, cool against your legs, is a constant reminder that this entire civilization is a gift of this river. The Nile's annual inundation, that predictable, life-giving flood, is what deposits the rich silt that makes this papyrus forest so lush and vibrant. This is a mainstream historical fact you're living right now. The entire Egyptian calendar, their agricultural cycle, their very concept of time, was built around this river's mood swings. You're standing in the engine room of a superpower. You select your first candidate, a sturdy stalk standing proud. Your tool is a simple, sharpened bronze knife. You don't just hack at it. There's a technique. You reach down, under the waterline, and make a clean, angled cut at the base of the stem. This preserves the root system, the rhizome, allowing the plant to regenerate and send up new shoots for the next season. It's sustainable farming, ancient Egyptian style. You're not just taking, you're ensuring you can take again next year. While you're doing this, you might notice other, less scrupulous harvesters using a rather unique method. Some old-timers swear by using a weighted, curved blade attached to a long pole, which they lower into the water and jerk back sharply to sever the stem. The fringe theory, whispered between the reeds, is that the most prized papyrus, the stuff meant for royal decrees, was sometimes cut by priests using a sacred dagger made of meteoritic iron, a metal they called the bone of the gods, believing it imbued the resulting paper with celestial power. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a mythological flourish to make royal documents seem more divine. You feel the stalk give way with a satisfying snap that's muffled by the water. You lift it, a good 12-foot-long spear of potential, heavy with sap and promise. You lay it gently on the growing pile in your reed boat, a small, papyrus reed craft that's itself made from last year's harvest. It's a perfect circle of life, right here in the marsh. Each stalk is a future page, a potential contract, a love poem, a star chart. And as you wipe the sweat from your brow, you can't help but feel a connection to every scribe, every merchant, every administrator whose life was built upon this simple, yet miraculous, act of harvesting. You've secured the first ingredient. The raw, green, messy beginning of something that will outlast stone and defy time itself. The rhythmic, gentle rocking of your papyrus skiff is a world away from the strenuous work of the harvest, a quiet reward for your labor as you pull your way back towards the workshop. The green stalks you've gathered are piled high, a fragrant, slightly sweet-smelling cargo that shifts and rustles with every movement of the boat. You're not just carrying plants, you're transporting potential, a heap of future knowledge and commerce. The sun is higher now, beating down with an intensity that makes the water shimmer, and you're grateful for the wide-brimmed hat woven from, you guessed it, last season's discarded papyrus fibers. It's a practical, unromantic truth of this work. Nothing goes to waste. The journey itself is a lesson in Egyptian logistics. You follow a narrow, man-made canal, a vein leading from the lifeblood of the Nile directly to the heart of the processing district on the riverbank. You pass other boats, some laden with limestone blocks for a new temple, others with amphorae of wine or sacks of grain, all moving to the slow, ancient rhythm of the river. This is where you get your first real taste of the scale of this operation. The papyrus harvest isn't a casual side hustle, it's a state-sponsored industry. The pharaoh, in his divine wisdom, understands that controlling the medium of writing is just as important as controlling the message itself. A significant portion of your harvest, the very best stalks, are destined for the royal house of life, the scriptorium attached to the great temples, where sacred texts are copied and administrative records are kept with meticulous care. Your simple, muddy task in the marshes is the foundation of the entire bureaucracy. You navigate your skiff towards a designated landing, a bustling area where the air is thick with the sounds of industry, the chatter of workers, the slap of wet stalks being unloaded, the distant tap-tap-tap of a carpenter maintaining the presses. It's a chaotic yet organized symphony. As you heave your stalks onto the bank, you're met by the foreman, a wiry man with a perpetually rolled-up papyrus scroll in his belt and a sharp eye for quality. He runs a practiced hand along one of your stalks, feeling its girth, checking for insect damage or rot. He gives a curt, approving nod. You've passed the first inspection. The stalks are now sorted, not by you, but by a team of workers who move with an efficiency born of generations of practice. The thickest, most perfect stems are set aside for the creation of the highest grade papyrus, the hieratica, reserved for religious texts. The medium ones will become the amphitheater, used for literary works and important documents. The thinner, or slightly damaged, stalks won't be discarded. They'll be bundled and sold as fuel, or used for making rope, mats, or even sandals. Every single part of the plant has a purpose. This is our mainstream historical fact for this section. The papyrus industry was a major economic engine for ancient Egypt, and at its peak, it was a royal monopoly, with the state controlling both production and export, making it a valuable source of wealth and a tool of political power. Now, the clock is ticking. The magic of the papyrus plant, its ability to be transformed from a fibrous stalk into a smooth writing surface, lies in its fresh, moist pith. Once cut, the stalks begin to dry out, and the precious sap that acts as a natural adhesive starts to harden and lose its potency. You have a window of maybe a day, 2 at most, to begin the transformation process. This urgency creates a palpable energy in the workshop. Your harvested stalks are carried not to a storage shed, but directly to the first processing station, a long, stone trough fed by a constant, slow trickle of fresh Nile water. Here, The stalks are thoroughly washed, the mud of the marshes sluiced away, revealing their vibrant green skin. They are then stacked in the shade, kept damp under wet cloths, a waiting line of raw material ready for its metamorphosis. It's a delicate balance, keeping them hydrated but not waterlogged, fresh but not fermenting. While you're ensuring the stalks stay perfectly moist, you might hear a whisper from the more superstitious workers about the breath of Thoth. They believe the god of writing himself watches over this process, and that a sudden, unexpected breeze rustling through the waiting stalks is a sign of his favor, promising a strong, high-quality batch of paper. Some even claim that if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers of future words held within the green stems. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine, widespread article of religious faith among the craftsmen or merely a charming folktale to add a layer of mystique to a very physical, demanding job. You take a moment, your own hands still slick with river water and plant sap, to watch the next stage begin. An older craftsman, his fingers nimble and sure, takes one of your stalks and with a small, sharp flint knife, makes a single, precise incision just below the feathery head. This is the first cut, the moment the plant ceases to be a whole entity and starts its journey to becoming a surface. You've delivered the sacred stems. The real alchemy is about to begin. The workshop is a symphony of precise, practiced movements, and you are now part of the orchestra. Your place is at a low, sturdy wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by countless hands and countless stalks. Before you lies one of the papyrus stems you so carefully harvested, its green rind cool and faintly glossy under your touch. The foreman has given you your tool, a small, incredibly sharp bronze knife with a slender, pointed blade. Your task, which seems deceptively simple, is one of the most critical in the entire process, splitting the heart. You take a deep breath, the scent of fresh-cut vegetation and wet stone filling your lungs. This isn't a job for brute force, it's a test of finesse and a steady hand. You recall the older craftsman's demonstration, the way he held the stalk not with a crushing grip, but with a gentle, guiding pressure. You position the stalk horizontally on the bench, holding it firmly with one hand. With the other, you bring the tip of your knife to the thick end of the stalk, just below the feathery crown that you haven't yet trimmed away. The first penetration is the most nerve-wracking. You press the point in, and with a soft, tearing sound, the tough green outer rind gives way. Now, the real magic begins. Instead of cutting through the stalk, you begin to pull the blade towards you, using its sharpness and the natural grain of the plant to guide you. The rind peels back in a long, continuous strip, like unrolling a scroll, revealing the hidden treasure within, the pith. It's a stunning, almost pure white, and its texture is unlike anything else. Dense, yet moist and slightly spongy, like a very firm marshmallow. This is the medulla, the very stuff of papyrus paper. Your goal is to peel the rind away in as wide and unbroken a strip as possible, creating two usable parts, the pristine white pith, and the long, flexible strip of green rind itself. The rind isn't discarded. You carefully coil it and set it aside in a separate basket. This tough, fibrous material will be woven into ropes, or used for caulking the seams of boats, or even twisted into wicks for lamps. Nothing is wasted. But your primary focus is the pith. Once you have a long, naked core of white pith exposed, you move to the next delicate operation. You take your knife and, with painstaking care, begin to slice the pith itself into thin, longitudinal strips. The ideal is to get them as thin and as uniform as possible, no thicker than a few millimeters. You can't just saw through it. You have to use a gentle, drawing motion, letting the sharpness of the blade do the work. The strips curl away from the core, pliable and damp, sticking slightly to your fingers. They feel alive, charged with potential. This is where you learn that not all pith strips are created equal. The very finest, widest, and most uniform strips come from the very center of the stalk. These will become the center of your papyrus sheet, the premium writing area. The narrower, or slightly irregular, strips from the outer edges of the pith will be used for the sides and ends of the sheet. There's a hierarchy even within the pith itself, a silent understanding of quality that will be reflected in the final product's price and prestige. This meticulous sorting is a mainstream historical fact evident in the analysis of ancient scrolls. The quality of the papyrus often degrades slightly towards the edges of a sheet, indicating the use of these less perfect strips in those areas. It was a practical, non-wasteful way to maximize the yield from every single stalk. As you work, your hands growing slick with the plant's natural juices, you notice the craftsman next to you has a different technique. He's using a notched piece of wood to hold the stalk steady while he pulls his blade through, ensuring his strips are of a perfectly consistent width. You try to emulate him, finding a rhythm, the soft shick sound of the blade parting the pith, the feel of the damp strip coming away in your hand, the placing of it gently into a shallow basin of fresh Nile water to keep it from drying out. The basin is already filling with these white, ribbon-like strips, floating and swaying like pale eels in the water. While you're focused on perfect, straight strips, some of the most expensive, luxury papyrus was sometimes deliberately made with subtly different methods. There are accounts, debated but persistent, of workshops that served the ultra-wealthy elite who would request that the pith be sliced on a slight bias, creating strips with a delicate, almost imperceptible diagonal grain. When woven together, this was said to create a sheet that caught the light differently, giving the writing a faint, shimmering quality, a status symbol for those who could afford unnecessary beauty. Historians still argue whether this was a real technique or merely a later Roman-era tall tale about the decadent excesses of the Egyptian upper class. Your pile of usable pith strips grows, a testament to your increasing skill. The discarded core of the stalk, now just a thin, wasted piece, is tossed into a basket for fuel. You look at the floating ribbons in your basin, the raw, white essence of the plant. They seem so fragile, so insubstantial. It's difficult to believe that these soft, damp strips are about to be forged into a material durable enough to survive for millennia. But that transformation requires the next step, a process that seems more like weaving cloth than making paper. The heart has been split. Now, it's time to build the page. The basin of floating pith strips sits before you, a watery palette of pure white potential. With hands that have been rinsed clean of the stickier plant sap, you reach into the cool water and select your first 2 strips. They are pliant, almost silky to the touch, and they cling to your fingers as you lift them. This is the moment of creation, the weaving of a sheet. You move to a flat, slightly angled board, its surface made of smooth, polished wood that has been lightly dampened. This is your loom, though there is no thread and no shuttle, only these strips of plant pith and the natural glue within them. You lay the first strip vertically on the board. It's one of your best, wide and uniform, cut from the very heart of the stalk. This is the foundation. Then, you take a second strip of equal quality and lay it directly on top of the first, but this time, horizontally, creating a perfect right angle. This simple cross, this fundamental intersection, is the genesis of your page. But you don't stop there. You continue, placing strip after strip vertically, side by side, until you have a solid rectangle of parallel white lines, all running in the same direction. This is your first layer. You gently press them down, ensuring they are closely aligned but not overlapping. The moisture from the board and the strips themselves makes them adhere just enough to hold their position. Now comes the counterweave. You begin laying the horizontal strips, one by one, directly on top of the vertical layer. But this isn't a simple stacking, this is a true weave. You place each horizontal strip so that it passes over and under the vertical strips in a simple, consistent pattern. As you work, you use a small, flat piece of smoothed bone to press each intersection firmly, squeezing out the excess water and helping to mesh the fibers of the two layers together. The sound is a soft, squelching tap tap tap, a rhythm of construction. This cross-hatched pattern is crucial. It isn't just for aesthetics. It provides the sheet with its remarkable strength and flexibility. The two layers of fibers, locked together at every intersection, support each other, distributing stress and preventing the sheet from tearing easily along a single grain. This is the mainstream historical fact you are embodying. The very word paper is derived from papyrus, a testament to the lasting impact of this ingenious laminated, woven structure. As you place the final horizontal strip, you step back to look at your handiwork. It's a large, damp, white rectangle, a grid of intersecting lines that looks more like a primitive textile than a writing surface. It's fragile, trembling like a water-soaked leaf. But within its fibers lies the secret ingredient, the sap. The very act of pressing the strips together, combined with the natural starches and sugars released from the crushed plant cells, begins to create a natural adhesive. This sap, now being squeezed out at every intersection, will, under pressure and heat, bind the two layers into a single, coherent sheet. It's a self-gluing system designed by nature and mastered by human ingenuity. While you're carefully constructing your grid, you might hear a whisper about the vein of the sheet. Some craftsmen believed that each papyrus stalk had a single, invisible vein running through its pith, and that if you aligned all your strips so these mystical veins ran in the same direction, say, all vertical, the resulting sheet would be stronger and more receptive to ink. It was a superstition born of close observation, an attempt to impose order on a natural process, and a belief that separated the merely competent craftsman from the true master of the art. Historians still argue whether this concept of a vein was a metaphorical teaching tool or a literal belief that influenced how high-quality papyrus was assembled. Your woven rectangle is complete, but it is still just a collection of separate strips held together by water and hope. It's incredibly vulnerable. A careless touch could shift the entire arrangement. A gust of wind could ruin it. This nascent sheet, this promise of a page, must now undergo its trial by pressure. It must be squeezed, pressed, and compacted to force the layers to merge, to convince the sap to become glue, and to drive out the water that gives it its current, fragile form. You carefully slide a thin, wooden board beneath your creation, preparing to transport it to the next station. The gentle weaving is over. Now, it's time for the force. The delicate, grid-like sheet you've so carefully woven now requires a baptism of pressure. You carry it, supported on its thin wooden board, with the focused reverence of someone transporting a sleeping child, over to the heart of the workshop's muscle, the press. It's not a complex machine, but its simplicity is its genius. Two massive, smooth slabs of limestone, the lower one fixed, the upper one suspended by ropes from a heavy wooden frame. The air around it smells different, less of fresh plants and more of old stone and the faint, metallic scent of the levers used to control the giant counterweights. This is where the papyrus sheet is born in earnest, where it is forged from a collection of parts into a unified whole. You and another worker carefully lift the damp, white rectangle from its carrying board and position it squarely on the center of the lower stone slab. It looks impossibly fragile against the immense, unyielding gray stone. Then, you place a large, square of absorbent linen cloth over the top of your sheet, followed by another thin, smooth board. This linen will act as a blotter, wicking away the moisture that is about to be violently expelled. Now, the real work begins. You both take hold of the thick, wooden levers. With a synchronized heave, you begin to lower the upper stone slab. It descends with a low, grinding rumble, a sound of immense, patient weight. At first, It makes contact with the protective board atop your sheet with a soft, wet thump. Then, you apply the pressure. You lean into the levers, engaging a system of counterweights that multiplies your effort. The stone presses down. Immediately, you hear it, a chorus of tiny, squeaking, crunching sounds as the plant fibers are crushed against each other. Water, tinted a faint milky white from the plant sap, begins to seep out from the edges of the sheet, soaking into the linen cloth and dripping in steady rivulets down the sides of the lower stone slab. The pressure is immense, but it has to be. You're not just squeezing out water, you're physically breaking down the cellular walls of the pith, forcing the natural gums and starches to mingle and merge, creating a continuous, homogeneous matrix that will bind the strips together permanently. This is the mainstream historical fact of the press. It was the crucial, non-negotiable step that transformed laminated plant material into a durable writing surface. Without this intense, dehydrating pressure, the strips would simply dry out and separate, resulting in a brittle, useless mat. You hold the pressure for a long time, occasionally releasing it slightly to replace the now-soaked linen blotter with a dry one. With each new cloth and each reapplication of pressure, more water is drawn out, and the sheet becomes thinner, denser, and more coherent. You can actually watch it transform. The distinct grid lines of the individual strips begin to blur and fade as the fibers intermingle under the colossal weight. The white color deepens slightly as the air is forced out and the material compacts. What was once a soft, spongy layer is becoming a firm, thin sheet. This process, this forceful persuasion, is a physical alchemy. It's a battle against the inherent nature of the plant, and the press is your weapon. While you're focused on pure, crushing force, there's a fringe theory, whispered only after the foreman is out of earshot, about an alternative method used for the most delicate, painted papyri. Some say that for illustrated sheets destined for temple walls or royal tombs, the craftsman would sometimes mix a tiny amount of honey or gum arabic into the pressing water. The belief was that this would plasticize the fibers, making the resulting sheet less brittle and giving the painted colors a richer, more vibrant finish. It was a secret technique, a proprietary trick passed down in certain families, and one that modern conservators sometimes debate when they find ancient illustrated papyri with a surprising, residual pliability. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate, known recipe or if the presence of such sugars in ancient papyrus is merely a result of later contamination or the use of adhesive during restoration. Finally, after what feels like an age of sustained pressure, the dripping slows to an occasional drop, and the sheet no longer yields significantly to the press. You carefully release the levers, and the great stone slab rises with a groan. You peel back the damp linen and the protective board. There it lies. It's no longer a collection of strips. It's a single, cohesive sheet of papyrus, damp and cool to the touch, but now possessing a newfound integrity and strength. It has been born under pressure, and it is ready for its final purification under the eye of the sun god himself. The newly pressed sheet, now a coherent whole but still cool and damp, is carefully peeled from the stone slab. It holds its shape, a testament to the brutal pressure it has just endured, but it's far from finished. Its moisture content is still too high, its form still too pliable. It needs to be cured, to be baked into its final, permanent state. And for that, you turn to the most reliable, powerful, and free resource in all of Egypt, the sun. You carry the sheet, still on its thin wooden board, out of the dim, humid workshop and into the blinding, white-hot glare of the midday sun. The drying yard is a vast, open area paved with smooth, dark slate tiles that absorb the sun's heat like a griddle. Rows of low, wooden racks are positioned to catch the full, unforgiving intensity of Ra's gaze. The air here shimmers with heat, and the scent is dry and clean, a stark contrast to the moist, vegetal smell of the workshop. You place your board onto one of the racks, positioning the pale sheet of papyrus so it lies perfectly flat. Almost immediately, you can see the effect. The residual moisture on the surface begins to steam faintly, vanishing into the arid air. This is not a gentle drying process, it's a rapid, violent dehydration. The sun's heat bakes the sheet, driving out the very last vestiges of water and setting the natural sap adhesive into a hard, permanent bond. You are not alone in this task. The yard is a patchwork of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of such sheets, all at various stages of drying. Apprentices move between the racks, their shadows short and dark beneath them, periodically checking the corners of the sheets, ensuring they aren't curling or lifting in the heat. A sheet that curls is a failed sheet. The goal is a perfectly flat, rigid page. As your sheet bakes, its color transforms. The wet, milky white deepens into the familiar pale cream, tan, or light brown hue we associate with ancient papyrus. This color is not a stain, it is the true color of the plant's pith, revealed and fixed by the sun. The mainstream historical fact at play here is one of environmental perfection. The unique climate of Egypt, with its incredibly low humidity and consistently powerful sunshine, was as vital to the production of papyrus as the plant itself. This industry simply could not have been replicated on a large scale in the damper, cloudier climates of Greece or Mesopotamia. Egypt held a natural monopoly. You watch as the sheet seems to tighten on the board, like a drumhead. The edges, which were slightly soft and blurred from the press, become sharp and defined. You run a finger lightly across the surface. It's already warm and noticeably drier, developing a slight roughness, the texture of the interwoven fibers now locked in place. The sun is doing more than just drying, it is sterilizing. The intense UV light kills any mold spores or bacteria that could, over time, cause the papyrus to decay. A properly sun-baked sheet is a stable sheet, one capable of lasting for centuries in the right conditions. While the scientific benefits of solar sterilization are clear to us, the ancient craftsmen had their own interpretations. Some believed that the sun god Ra was not just providing heat, but was actively imparting a divine essence into the sheet. They thought that a papyrus dried under a cloudless, perfect sky, especially during the still hours of high noon, would be blessed, making the ink applied to it darker and more permanent. There are even apocryphal accounts of particularly pious workshops that would inscribe a tiny, hidden hieroglyph for Ra on the wooden drying boards, believing the god's symbol would be imprinted onto the sheet's very fibers. Historians still argue whether this was a common superstitious practice or merely a romantic story told to buyers to justify a higher price for sun-blessed papyrus. After several hours, the transformation is complete. The sheet is no longer merely dry, it is desiccated, hard, and stiff as a board. It makes a faint, cardboard-like thwack when you tap it with your fingernail. It is now a piece of paper, but it is not yet a writing surface. It's too rough, too textured. The baking sun has given it its form and its durability, but it has also left it in a state that would shred a scribe's reed brush and drink ink like sand. The sun god's work is done. Now, it's time for the final, human touch, the art of the smooth. The sun-baked sheet is rigid and sturdy in your hands, but it feels more like a piece of lightweight wood or a thick shard of pottery than paper. Its surface is rough, covered in the minute ridges and valleys of the compressed fiber grid, and it has a distinct, slight warp from its violent dehydration. This will not do. A scribe's delicate brush, loaded with precious ink, would catch on every tiny imperfection, bleeding and sputtering. The final stage of the papyrus's creation is perhaps the most intimate, the art of the smooth. You carry the stiff sheet back inside to a different kind of workbench, one dedicated not to force, but to finesse. Your tools for this task are simple, almost primitive, but their effect is transformative. The primary one is a smooth, oval polishing stone, typically a hard, fine-grained river stone like basalt or granite, worn perfectly smooth by generations of use. It fits comfortably in the palm of your hand, its surface so polished it feels almost soft. You also have a small pot of a thin, milky liquid, a size made from diluted natron or a weak glue derived from animal hides. This isn't always used, but for the highest grade sheets, it's essential for sealing the surface. You lay the rough sheet flat on the bench, holding it steady with one hand. With the other, you take your polishing stone and begin to rub. The motion is rhythmic, circular, and firm. You start at one corner and work your way methodically across the entire surface. The sound is a soft, dry, swishing whisper, the sound of friction being systematically erased. Under the relentless, smooth pressure of the stone, the microscopic peaks of the fibrous surface are gradually worn down, compacted, and burnished. You can feel the change through the stone itself. The initial resistance gives way to a smoother, easier glide. The sheet begins to lose its cardboard-like stiffness, becoming more flexible, more pliable, more like the papyrus we imagine. This polishing process is a mainstream historical fact confirmed by microscopic analysis of ancient fragments, which show a characteristically flattened and compacted surface layer, evidence of this final, manual finishing. As you work, the color of the sheet changes subtly once more. The pale, matte tan begins to take on a faint sheen, a low luster gleam where the light catches the burnished fibers. You are not just smoothing it, you are sealing it. The pressure and friction generate a tiny amount of heat, which helps to further activate any remaining natural gums, creating an even more unified and non-porous surface. For the very best sheets, you now take a soft cloth, dip it lightly into the sizing liquid, and wipe it evenly across the surface. This thin layer soaks in and, upon drying, will create a near-impervious barrier, preventing the ink from feathering or bleeding into the paper's core. This is the difference between a common scrap for notes and a luxurious roll for a royal annals. While you're focused on creating a perfectly smooth surface, you might hear tales of scribes who had very specific, almost eccentric, preferences for their polishing tools. Some reportedly insisted on using a specific type of stone, a black basalt from a particular quarry near Aswan, claiming it gave the papyrus a cooler feel that was better for the ink. Others, it is said, used polished pieces of ivory or even a prized, smooth hippopotamus tooth, believing these organic materials imparted a unique life into the sheet. Historians still argue whether these were the genuine, finicky demands of master scribes or just tall tales meant to illustrate the prestige associated with the written word. You flip the sheet over and repeat the entire process on the other side, though this side, the recto, will typically receive a slightly less intensive polishing, as it is the side where the fibers run horizontally and is considered the back of the sheet. The side you polished first, the verso, with its vertical fibers, is the preferred writing surface. After hours of this meticulous, meditative work, you finally set your polishing stone down. You run your bare fingertips across the sheet. The transformation is remarkable. It is smooth, almost velvety. It has a pleasant, subtle flexibility. It feels like knowledge feels. It is ready. A single sheet of papyrus, born in the marsh, forged in the press, baked by the sun, and perfected by your hand, now lies complete before you. But a single sheet has limited use. To contain a story, a law, or a prayer, you need more. You need a scroll. A single sheet of papyrus, for all its perfection, is a lonely thing. It can hold a short letter, a list of goods, or a quick sketch, but it cannot contain an epic, a legal code, or the detailed rituals for traversing the afterlife. For that, you need length. You need continuity. You need a scroll. So, you gather your finished sheets, each one a cream-colored rectangle of smooth, burnished potential, and you bring them to the joining table. This is where individual pages become a continuous narrative, where the magic of the codex before the codex happens. The process is deceptively simple, but it requires a precise eye and a steady hand. You take 2 sheets and lay them side by side on the table, with their long edges slightly overlapping. The overlap is critical. It's usually about a finger's width, no more. The goal is to create a strong, nearly invisible seam. The side you are joining is the verso, the side with the vertical fibers, which is typically the back of the sheet. This means the preferred writing surface, the verso, will be a continuous, unbroken plane on the inside of the rolled scroll. You carefully apply a thin, even layer of a special adhesive to the overlapping edge of one sheet. This isn't the crude paste used for pottery. This is a high-quality glue, often made from boiled-down animal bones or hides, chosen for its clarity and flexibility when dry. A bad adhesive could become brittle, crack, and cause the entire scroll to separate at a crucial moment. You then press the second sheet's edge firmly onto the glued one, aligning them perfectly. Immediately, you use your smooth polishing stone to burnish the seam from both sides, applying firm pressure to squeeze out excess glue and to mesh the fibers of the 2 sheets together across the join. When done correctly, the seam becomes incredibly strong, often stronger than the sheet itself, and so thin that when the scroll is rolled, it doesn't create a noticeable bump. You continue this process, sheet after sheet, until you have created a long, continuous strip of papyrus that can stretch for 20, 30, or even more feet. This creation of a long scroll from joined sheets is a mainstream historical fact that explains the physical nature of surviving texts, like the Book of the Dead, where a single, immensely long roll contains a complete sequence of spells and illustrations. As your scroll lengthens, you have to think about its final form. You don't just leave the ends raw. At the beginning of the scroll, you attach a wooden rod, around which the entire document will be rolled. This rod, sometimes plain, sometimes finely carved or even gilded, serves as the core and provides a firm handle for unrolling and re-rolling. At the far end of the scroll, you attach a simpler, thinner strip of papyrus or a piece of leather, which acts as a protective outer cover when the scroll is fully rolled up. Sometimes, a small papyrus label is glued to this outer cover, identifying the scroll's contents, the ancient equivalent of a book's spine. While you're focused on creating a strong, functional scroll, you might hear rumors about the secret master joins. Some scrolls, destined for the most sacred of temple libraries, were allegedly joined not with a simple overlap, but with a complex, interlocking zigzag or feather edge, a technique that supposedly distributed stress more evenly and made the seam virtually undetectable. It was a technique so time-consuming that it was reserved only for texts believed to be of divine origin. Historians still argue whether this was a real, advanced joinery technique practiced by a select few or a mythical lost art invented by later scribes to lament the declining quality of their own materials. You step back and look at your handiwork. A long, creamy banner of papyrus lies across the table, a river of blank space waiting for the flood of words. It's a strangely powerful object, even in its silence. It has weight, both physical and metaphorical. It represents a significant investment of time, skill, and material. This is no scrap. This is a vehicle for something important. The joined sheets, now a single, unified strip, are ready for their ultimate purpose. The vessel is built. Now, it waits to be filled with meaning, with the dark, elegant flow of ink from a scribe's steady hand. The scroll, a long, blank river of creamy papyrus, is ready. But a river needs water to flow, and a scroll needs ink to give it life. Before a single hieroglyph can be painted, the scribe must prepare his tools. This is a ritual in itself, a quiet, methodical prelude to the act of creation. You are not the scribe, but you are in his workspace now, a small, well-lit corner of the temple complex or a wealthy household's library. The air is different here. It smells of wood, minerals, and the faint, acrid tang of soot. The chaos of the workshop is a distant memory, replaced by an atmosphere of intense focus. The centerpiece of the scribe's kit is his palette. It's not a flat board for mixing paints, but a long, narrow, rectangular object, usually made of wood, though you might see an expensive one carved from ivory or alabaster. Along its length are 2 or more deep, circular wells for holding ink. At one end is a slot to hold the scribe's brushes. The most common inks are 2 colors, black and red. The black ink is the workhorse, used for the body of the text. It's made from a simple, brilliant formula, carbon black, which is essentially soot, mixed with a thin gum arabic solution as a binder. The soot provides a deep, matte, incredibly stable black that, as history has proven, is resistant to fading. The red ink, used for headings, keywords, or to mark the start of new sections, is made from red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment, also mixed with gum arabic. These 2 colors, black and red, will define the visual rhythm of Egyptian writing for millennia. This composition of ink is a mainstream historical fact, confirmed by chemical analysis of ancient documents. Its mineral-based nature is a key reason why so many texts have survived, as they are not susceptible to the fading that plagues organic inks. Now, watch the scribe prepare. He takes a small, hard cake of solid black ink and grates a little into one of the wells on his palette. He adds a few drops of water from a small shell and begins to grind the mixture with a tiny, smooth pestle, working it into a smooth, creamy liquid. He tests the consistency by dipping the tip of his brush and drawing a quick, dark line on a piece of broken pottery, an ostrakon, that serves as his scratch pad. He adjusts the mix until it flows perfectly, not too watery and pale, not too thick and gloppy. He repeats the process with the red ochre in the other well. His brushes are his most personal tools. They are not quills, but precise brushes made from a very specific source, the stem of the rush plant Juncus maritimus. He chews one end of a short stem to separate the fibers, creating a fine, soft, and responsive tip. A master scribe might have a whole set of these, each chewed to a different thickness for fine detail work or bold headlines. While the scribe is focused on his perfect black and red, you might hear whispers of a third, much rarer color. Some texts allude to a divine blue or green of the gods, an ink supposedly used for the names of certain deities or for illustrating the skin of gods like Osiris. The recipe was a closely guarded secret of the temple priests, said to involve crushed lapis lazuli or malachite, mixed not with gum, but with honey and myrrh to give it a luminous, fragrant quality. Historians still argue whether these precious pigment inks were ever actually used on papyrus scrolls or if their mention was purely symbolic, representing an ideal rather than a practical reality. The scribe arranges everything just so. His palette, with its wells of dark liquid. His collection of rush brushes, their chewed ends pristine. A pot of clear water for rinsing. A rag for wiping mistakes. A burnisher, a smooth stone much like your own, for occasionally smoothing a rough patch on the papyrus before he writes. He is the conductor, and these are his instruments. The blank scroll is laid out before him, weighted at the corners with smooth, heavy stones. He takes a final, deep breath, the scent of soot and gum arabic filling his senses. The stage is set. The silence in the room is profound, broken only by the faint, dry rustle of the papyrus as he unrolls the first section. The vessel is built and filled. Now, it is time to give it a voice. The scribe's hand hovers over the papyrus, a rush brush held with the relaxed confidence of a lifetime of practice. He dips the chewed, fibrous tip into the well of black ink, rolling it to achieve a perfect point, not too drippy, not too dry. Then, with no apparent hesitation, He touches it to the pristine, creamy surface. This is the moment of Genesis. The first stroke is not a random scrawl. It is the beginning of a carefully chosen text, in this case, a passage from a religious hymn to the god Thoth, the patron of scribes himself. It is a fitting tribute, a nod to the divine force that, in the Egyptian mind, invented writing. You watch, mesmerized, as the ink flows from the brush. It doesn't soak in and feather like ink on modern paper. It sits on the surface of the burnished papyrus, a rich, velvety black line that seems to become part of the sheet itself. The scribe's movements are economical and fluid. He is not drawing pictures. He is writing in hieratic, the cursive, everyday script used for administrative documents, letters, and literary texts like this one. Hieroglyphs are for monuments. Hieratic is for the flow of daily life and knowledge. His hand moves left to right, the brush creating thick and thin lines with subtle changes in pressure. He paints a bird, a wave of water, a pair of legs in motion, all the simplified, elegant forms of the hieratic script. Each sign is a tiny masterpiece of precision, placed with exact spacing in straight, imaginary lines only he can see. This act of writing a literary or religious text on a fresh scroll is a mainstream historical fact that represents the primary purpose of high-quality papyrus: to preserve the culture's most important non-administrative thoughts, from stories and poems to prayers and wisdom literature. He works in sections, unrolling a new length of the scroll, weighting it down, and filling it with the elegant, dark script. The text grows, a marching column of black signs, a visual representation of spoken words now captured forever. He is not just a copyist, he is a performer, channeling the meaning of the words through his hand. Every so often, he pauses. He dips his brush into the red ink well. This is for the rubric, a term we still use today that comes from the Latin for red. He uses the red to write the name of the god Thoth, making it stand out from the black text, a visual cue of importance and reverence. He also uses it to mark the end of a major section, painting a small, red horizontal line. The scroll is becoming not just a container of text, but an organized, navigable document. As the scribe works, you might notice him occasionally, almost imperceptibly, blowing on a freshly inked section. This isn't just to dry it faster. A fringe belief among some scribes held that the human breath, the ankh, carried life force. By blowing gently on the divine name of Thoth written in red, the scribe was, in a small way, animating the text, infusing it with a spark of life and ensuring the god would look favorably upon his work. It was a tiny, personal ritual of consecration. Historians still argue whether this was a widely held superstition or simply a practical habit that later acquired a spiritual explanation. The sound in the room is a soft trilogy: the faint scratch of the rush fibers on the papyrus surface, the occasional tap of the brush against the rim of the inkwell, and the scribe's own steady, quiet breathing. There are no mistakes. If he makes one, the text is sacred, so he cannot simply scratch it out. He might use a damp rag to carefully blot and lift the wet ink, or, if the error is small, he will just incorporate it, writing the correct sign next to it. The papyrus, for all its smoothness, is unforgiving. It demands perfection. As you watch the columns of text accumulate, you realize you are witnessing the birth of an object of both immense practical utility and profound beauty. The scroll is no longer blank. It is now a repository of thought, a piece of the Egyptian mind made physical, ready to be rolled, sealed, and sent out into the world to do its work. The scribe has finished his section, the black and red hieratic script drying to a permanent matte finish on the papyrus. The scroll, now imbued with sacred words, is no longer just an object. It is a vessel of power and knowledge. But that power is useless if it remains in this one room. It needs to travel, to be read, to perform its function in the wider world. So, the scroll is carefully rolled up, starting from the end with the wooden rod, ensuring the text is protected on the inside. The roll is tight and even, a solid, cylindrical object that feels satisfyingly dense in your hand. It is then tied with a simple papyrus cord and sealed with a small dollop of clay impressed with the stamp of the temple, a guarantee of its authenticity and a safeguard against prying eyes. Your role now shifts from creator to custodian. You are tasked with taking this finished scroll and preparing it for its journey down the Nile, the same river that gave birth to the plant it's made from. You carry it to the docks, a chaotic, vibrant world of its own. The smell of fish, spices, and river mud fills the air, a stark contrast to the quiet, ink-scented scriptorium. The scroll is your cargo, but it is not packed in a crate with amphorae of wine or sacks of grain. It is treated with more care. You place it inside a protective cylindrical case made of leather or, for a very important document, a carved wooden tube. This case will shield it from the splashing river water, the dust of the road, and the relentless sun. You approach a riverboat, a broad, shallow draft vessel with a single large square sail, currently being loaded with a variety of goods. The captain, a sun-leathered man with a voice hoarse from shouting over the wind and water, oversees the operation. You hand him the sealed scroll case. He doesn't treat it with the reverence of a priest. He treats it with the practical respect of a man who understands value. He notes its destination, a temple in the next nome, 100 miles downriver, and places it in a small, locked chest near the stern, away from the heavier, more chaotic cargo. This scroll is part of the lifeblood of the state, a piece of administrative or religious instruction that will govern actions, record taxes, or guide rituals in another city. This system of transporting scrolls via the Nile was the mainstream historical backbone of Egyptian administration, allowing the central government in Memphis or Thebes to maintain control over a long, narrow kingdom. As the boat is loaded, you take a moment to consider the journey. The scroll will travel on the current, the sail unfurled to catch the northerly breeze, moving with a slow, stately grace. It will pass farmers tending their fields, children swimming by the bank, funeral processions heading to the necropolis on the west bank. The world outside will be a riot of life and color, but inside its protective case, the scroll will remain a world of pure, ordered thought, the words of the scribe untouched by the journey. While you're entrusting the scroll to the boat captain, you might overhear a sailor telling a superstitious tale. Some rivermen believed that boats carrying particularly important religious scrolls were blessed with smoother journeys. They thought the sacred words themselves had a power that could calm the river's unpredictable spirits and ensure a favorable wind. There was even a belief that if a storm did threaten, the captain could touch the scroll case to the mast to invoke the protection of the god whose words were inside. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief that influenced how captains prioritized certain cargo or just a sailor's yarn, a way to add a layer of divine importance to their sometimes monotonous work. The boat is ready. The sail is raised, a stark white against the deep blue sky. The oarsmen push off from the dock, and the current gently takes hold. You watch as the vessel, carrying your scroll, begins its journey. It is a profound moment. You have shepherded this object from a green stalk in the marsh to a finished product of culture, and now you are sending it out into the world to fulfill its purpose. It is a tiny thread in the vast fabric of the kingdom, but an essential one. The knowledge has been captured, preserved, and is now in motion. The next stop is its destination, where it will be unsealed, unrolled, and its words given voice again, completing the cycle that began with your first cut into the papyrus stalk. The riverboat arrives at its destination, a bustling provincial capital whose temples and administrative buildings are painted in bright, sun-faded colors. The scroll case is retrieved from the captain's locked chest and handed over to a waiting temple official. The clay seal is examined, found to be intact, and then broken with a satisfying crack. The scroll is extracted, and in the cool, dim light of a government storeroom, it is unrolled for the first time since it left the scribe's hands. A senior scribe scans the text, his eyes moving quickly over the familiar hieratic script. He nods. The instructions from the capital are clear. This scroll, a record of grain taxes owed from the surrounding region, is now the operational law of the land. But its journey is not over. It now enters the realm of commerce, for the temple is not just a religious center. It is a bank, a warehouse, and a hub of economic activity. You follow as the scroll is taken to the temple's commercial quarter, where the air smells of incense, dust, and the faint, metallic scent of weighed silver. A merchant stands before a high desk, a man whose fine linen robe and heavy gold bracelets speak of successful deals. He is here to purchase papyrus. Not the raw stalks, but the finished, blank product. The temple official unrolls a separate scroll, an inventory list, and then presents the merchant with a sample, a single, perfect sheet of the high-grade hieratica papyrus, the same quality you helped create. The merchant runs his fingers over its smooth, burnished surface, holding it up to the light to check for inconsistencies. He feels its weight, its flexibility. He is not buying a story or a prayer. He is buying potential, a blank slate upon which he will record his own transactions, contracts, and shipping manifests. This transaction is a mainstream historical fact. Papyrus was one of Egypt's most valuable exports, a high-value commodity traded throughout the Mediterranean, and its production and sale were a major source of wealth for the temples and the state. The negotiation begins. The price isn't just for one sheet, but for a standard roll, typically 20 sheets joined together. The cost is discussed in terms of deben, units of weight for copper or silver. High-quality papyrus is expensive, a luxury good. The merchant argues about the price, pointing out a barely visible thin spot near the edge of the sample sheet. The temple official counters by emphasizing the sheet's perfect polish, its strong, seamless joins, and its impeccable, creamy color. This is where you feel a strange sense of pride. The quality of the work you did weeks ago, the careful splitting of the pith, the even pressing, the meticulous polishing, all of it is being evaluated in this moment of commerce. The merchant's business, his record-keeping, his very credibility, rests on the durability and quality of the papyrus he uses. A cheap roll that crinkles or absorbs ink poorly could lead to blurred records and disputed contracts. While the merchant is haggling over the price, you might hear a whispered piece of commercial advice. Some merchants believed that papyrus made during the season of Akhet, the inundation, was superior. Their reasoning was that the plants, swollen with the Nile's life-giving water, produced a pith that was whiter and created a more supple, durable sheet. They were willing to pay a premium for inundation papyrus, convinced it was less likely to crack with age. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine qualitative difference or simply a clever marketing ploy invented by Egyptian sellers to create a seasonal, high-end product and justify a price hike. Finally, a price is agreed upon. The merchant's silver is weighed on a balance scale, and in return, he is given several fresh, blank papyrus rolls, each in its own protective case. He handles them with the same care he would afford a piece of fine jewelry. He has purchased the medium of memory, the physical substance of his account books. Your scroll, the one containing the tax records, will be filed away in a pottery jar in the temple archive, a permanent record. But the blank rolls are heading back out into the world, to the merchant's home and then onto a ship bound for a port in Greece or Phoenicia, where they will be sold again for a profit. The cycle is complete, from plant, to product, to prized commodity. The humble marsh reed has become currency. The tax record scroll, its official duties complete, does not end its life discarded or destroyed. It is carefully re-rolled, tied, and labeled with a small hanging docket. You carry it now into the heart of the temple's memory, the library archive. The air here is cool, still, and smells profoundly of papyrus, cedarwood, and the faint, dry scent of ancient dust. It is a holy silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of your feet on the stone floor. Light slants in from high, narrow windows, illuminating countless cylindrical pottery jars, stacked on shelves that reach towards the shadowy ceiling. Each jar, tall and wide-mouthed, is labeled with a brief description of its contents. This is not a library of books on open shelves. It is a fortress of knowledge, a carefully organized repository designed to preserve information for eternity. You find the correct section, marked for administrative records from this specific regnal year of the pharaoh. You gently place your scroll into a waiting jar, already containing a dozen other scrolls from the same district. A layer of dry, powdered natron salt sits at the bottom of the jar, a desiccant to absorb any ambient moisture and ward off the insects and mold that are the eternal enemies of papyrus. You place a ceramic lid on top, sealing the scroll in its own microclimate, a dry, dark, and stable tomb for the written word. This method of storage in sealed jars, often within tomb-like structures or dedicated library rooms, is a mainstream historical fact that explains the survival of so many papyri in the arid Egyptian climate. These archives were the hard drives of the ancient world, and the jar was their protective casing. As you place the final scroll in the jar, you run your hand along the shelves. These jars don't just hold tax records. Nearby are jars containing copies of the Book of the Dead, their papyrus finer, their scripts more elaborate. Further down are literary texts, the story of Sinew, wisdom teachings of Ptah-hotep, hymns to the gods. There are medical texts, astronomical charts, and dream interpretations. This archive is the collective brain of the civilization, a physical manifestation of its knowledge, its beliefs, and its bureaucratic soul. To stand here is to understand that the Egyptians saw writing not as a temporary tool, but as a means of defeating time itself. They built pyramids of stone for their bodies and archives of papyrus for their minds. While you are securing the scroll for the ages, you might hear the head archivist speak of a peculiar belief. Some librarians were said to perform a small, silent ritual when sealing a jar containing a particularly sacred text. Before placing the lid, they would breathe a single word, the name of the god Thoth, into the jar, believing that his spirit would then inhabit the vessel and stand guard over the words inside, protecting them from both physical decay and spiritual corruption. It was a final, whispered layer of consecration. Historians still argue whether this was a formalized temple practice or merely a personal superstition held by a few devout archivists. Your work in the archive is done. The scroll you helped create, from its beginnings as a stalk in the sun-drenched marsh to its final state as a vessel of recorded thought, has reached its intended home. It is safe. It is organized. It is preserved. It will sit here, year after year, decade after decade, as pharaohs rise and fall, as empires shift outside the borders of the Black Land. The ink, made of soot and ochre, will not fade. The papyrus, cured by the sun and sealed from moisture, will not crumble. It has achieved a kind of immortality. But this is not the end of the story for all scrolls. For every one that finds this peaceful rest in a temple archive, countless others are used, reused, and eventually, when their practical life is over, discarded. And it is in those places of discard, in the trash heaps of ancient towns, that a different, more surprising kind of legacy awaits. Not every scroll is destined for the hallowed silence of a temple archive. For every sacred text or royal decree, there are 1,000 scraps of papyrus used for the messy, mundane business of life. A soldier's letter home, a merchant's hastily scribbled invoice, a student's practice alphabet, a landlord's list of rent payments. These documents, once their immediate purpose has passed, are not carefully filed away. They are tossed into trash heaps, used as scrap to stuff the gaps in mummy casings, or worse, they are recycled. You see, the precious, smooth writing surface of a used papyrus scroll was often too valuable to throw away entirely. Instead, the old text was washed or scraped off, and the sheet was used again, creating a palimpsest, a manuscript page that has been reused. You find yourself now not in a clean library, but in a scribe's less glamorous workspace, where a young apprentice is tasked with this very chore. He has a used scroll, its surface covered in faded administrative script. He takes a damp cloth and a piece of pumice stone and begins the tedious work of scrubbing the old ink away. It's a difficult job. The carbon black ink is stubborn, and the pumice can easily damage the papyrus surface if he presses too hard. The resulting sheet will be cheaper, its surface slightly rougher, suitable for drafts or informal notes. But sometimes, the old writing isn't fully erased. Traces of it remain, ghostly impressions hiding beneath the new text. For centuries, these ghosts were simply imperfections. But in our modern age, they have become treasures. This practice of creating palimpsests is a mainstream historical fact, and it is through advanced imaging techniques like multispectral analysis that we can now often recover the older, erased text, sometimes discovering lost literary works or alternative historical accounts hidden beneath a later, more mundane document. You watch as the apprentice finishes his work, leaving a serviceable, if slightly scarred, sheet for his master to reuse. But for the truly unrecoverable scraps, the end is the town dump. These ancient garbage dumps, known as middens, are where the real, unvarnished history of everyday life is found. It is in these refuse piles, preserved by the hyper-arid Egyptian climate, that we find shopping lists, personal letters complaining about noisy neighbors, legal petitions, and bawdy love poems. These fragments tell us more about the average Egyptian than all the royal annals in the archives. They are the voices of the people, preserved by accident in the very act of being thrown away. While most discarded papyrus was just trash, there was a strange, secondary market for it in certain magical circles. Practitioners of folk magic would sometimes seek out papyrus scraps that had contained legal documents, especially verdicts from a court. They believed the inherent power of the judgment could be harnessed. They would write spells on the back of these legal fragments, or even grind the papyrus into a powder to be used in potions, hoping to transfer the authority of the court onto their own magical endeavors. Historians still argue whether this was a common, if clandestine, practice or merely an isolated superstition mentioned in a handful of surviving magical texts. As you stand over this metaphorical and physical trash heap, you understand the full, ironic circle. The papyrus that was grown with such care, processed with such skill, and written upon with such purpose, often finds its longest-lasting legacy not in intentional preservation, but in accidental discard. The scrolls in the temple archives are magnificent, but they are the voice of the state. The scraps in the trash are the whispers of humanity. They are the proof that this technology, this miracle of pressed plant fiber, permeated every level of society, from the pharaoh to the farmer. It was the text message, the post-it note, and the legal pad of the ancient world. And it is in its very disposability that its most enduring gift to us is given, an unfiltered, uncurated window into the past. Centuries have turned to millennia. The pharaohs you served are now names in stone, their empires dust. The temple where you stored the scrolls is a skeleton of pillars, its roof open to the sky. The bustling workshop on the Nile bank is silent, buried under layers of sand and time. The specific, sacred process you knew, the precise cut, the rhythmic press, the sun baking and the hand burnishing, faded away, a victim of changing economies, new technologies, and the simple, relentless erosion of time. The papyrus plant itself still grows in the marshes, a living relic of that lost world, but the knowledge of how to transform it into a writing surface, the craft that you embodied, vanished into history. It was a loss so complete that for generations, the very sight of hieroglyphs was a mystery, their meaning locked away, the papyrus scrolls that survived becoming indecipherable artifacts rather than readable texts. And yet, the legacy of your work was not entirely extinguished. It slept. It slept in the dry, dark interiors of tombs, hidden in sealed jars, buried under the sands of abandoned cities. It waited. It waited for the curious, for the archaeologists and the scholars who would, thousands of years later, carefully brush away the dust and unroll the very scrolls you had a hand in creating. The first moment a modern eye saw those black and red signs on the creamy, fibrous sheet, the long silence was broken. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone provided the key, but it was the papyrus scrolls themselves that provided the library. Your work, the work of countless nameless harvesters and craftsmen, became the primary source, the eyewitness account that allowed a lost civilization to speak again. We learned of their math, their medicine, their legal disputes, their love songs, and their profound religious beliefs not from their monuments, but from their paper. This survival is the ultimate mainstream historical fact. Papyrus, for all its organic fragility, proved to be one of the most durable information storage systems in human history when preserved in the right conditions, outlasting metal and stone in its capacity to convey the nuanced, everyday voice of a people. Today, the word paper is a direct linguistic descendant of papyrus, a permanent tribute woven into the fabric of our own language. The scroll you helped join became the model for the book, the codex, and by extension, every screen you now read. The fundamental human urge to record, to communicate across time, that you served by the Nile, is the same urge that powers the digital world. You were part of the genesis of that chain. While the industrial production of papyrus ceased, the dream of it never truly died. In the 20th century, an Egyptian scientist and a British printer, working from descriptions in Pliny the Elder's Natural History and by examining ancient samples under microscopes, managed to successfully recreate the process, producing the first true papyrus paper in over 1,000 years. It was a revival, a rekindling of a flame long thought extinguished. Historians still argue whether their modern papyrus is a perfect replica of the ancient craft or a close, yet different, interpretation. But the very fact of its revival is a testament to the enduring power of the material you helped create. So, as the last of the scrolls from your time are studied in climate-controlled museum cases, as their images are scanned and shared across the globe in an instant, your legacy is secure. The reeds you cut, the strips you sliced, the sheets you pressed, they were not just paper. They were time machines. And they have delivered their message, across a gulf of 5,000 years, directly to us. The journey that began with your sandals sinking into the black mud of the Nile has reached its final, quiet, and triumphant shore. The story of papyrus is, in its final essence, a story of quiet persistence. It is not the drama of pyramids, nor the clash of armies, but the gentle, patient rhythm of a craft, of hands transforming the gifts of a river into a vessel for the human spirit. That vessel, fragile as a dried leaf, proved strong enough to carry the weight of a civilization across the abyss of ages. So let the images of the marsh, the workshop, and the scribe's quiet room fade now, like ink softening into the papyrus at the end of a long scroll. Let the sounds of the press and the rustle of reeds dissolve into the quiet of your own room. The knowledge is safe. The words have been passed on. The long, continuous narrative of human curiosity, which began with a cut stalk in the sun, continues here, with you, listening in the dark. Your journey through this ancient process is complete. You can release the focus, let the details blur, and allow the deep, satisfying piece of a story fully told to settle over you. Breathe deeply and feel the weight of time, not as a burden, but as a soft blanket, a reassurance that some things, even the most delicate, are designed to endure. Rest now,